Welcome back to Quizzy GK. Welcome to an introduction to Russian history. Russia is a vast country with a rich history that spans over 1,000 years. From the rise of the Kievan Rus in the 9th century to the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russian history has been shaped by a variety of cultural, political, and economic forces. In the 9th century, the Kievan Rus emerged as a powerful state in Eastern Europe. This early Russian state was heavily influenced by Byzantine culture and Orthodox Christianity, which remains a dominant religion in Russia to this day. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the Russian Tsars consolidated power and expanded the country's territory through a series of military campaigns. The reign of Peter the Great in the early 18th century saw Russia emerge as a major European power, with extensive modernization and reforms aimed at bringing the country into the modern era. The 19th century was marked by a growing sense of nationalism and a push for political reforms, culminating in the 1917 Russian Revolution. The revolution saw the overthrow of the Tsarist regime and the establishment of the world's first socialist state. Under Soviet rule, Russia underwent rapid industrialization and social change, but also experienced political repression and human rights abuses. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 led to the establishment of the Russian Federation, a democratic republic with a market-based economy. Today, Russia remains a major global power, with a rich cultural heritage and a complex political and economic landscape. Today we will be discussing the history of Russia from Slavic migration on 9th century till 10th century AD. From Rus-Byzantium wars to Christianization of Kievan Rus. The history of Russia begins long before the Slavic migrations. The earliest known civilization in the region was that of the Scythians, who lived in the area from around the 8th century BC until the 4th century AD. The Slavic migrations into the region that would later become Russia began in the 6th century AD, when various Slavic tribes started to move into the area from the Carpathian Mountains. However, it wasn't until the 9th century AD that the Slavic tribes in the region began to coalesce into a single political entity, led by Vikings, who founded the city of Novgorod and established the first Russian state, known as Kievan Rus. While the Slavic migrations played an important role in the history of Russia, they were not the starting point of Russian history. The Slavs who migrated to Russia were a group of Eastern Slavs who migrated from their ancestral homeland in the Carpathian Mountains and settled in the region that would later become Kievan Rus. This migration was part of a larger movement that occurred during the 6th and 7th centuries AD, in which various Slavic tribes moved into areas previously inhabited by Germanic and Finno-Ugric peoples. The Eastern Slavs who migrated to Russia were comprised of several tribes, including the Krivichians, the Ilmen Slavs, and the Drevlians. They were primarily farmers and hunters, living in small, scattered settlements throughout the region's rivers and forests. The traditional start date of Russian history is the establishment of the Rus state in the north in 862, ruled by Varangians. The origin of the Slavic people is a subject of much debate among historians and anthropologists. However, it is generally believed that the Slavs originated in the area that is now modern-day Ukraine and migrated into present-day Russia during the early Middle Ages. The first East Slavic state, known as Kievan Rus, was established in the 9th century in what is now Ukraine and Russia. It was ruled by the Varangians, a group of Scandinavian warriors who had established themselves in the region. Over time, the Slavic people gradually assimilated into the culture and language of the Varangians, and Kievan Rus became a Slavic state. The exact reasons why the Slavs invited a Varangian prince to rule over them are not entirely clear, as there are few written records from this period of early Slavic history. However, several theories attempt to explain why the Slavs turned to the Varangians for leadership. One theory is that the Slavic tribes were experiencing internal conflicts and sought a strong leader who could bring peace and stability to the region. The Varangians, with their experience in warfare and reputation as fierce warriors, may have been seen as ideal candidates for this position. Another theory suggests that the Slavs invited the Varangians to rule over them as a way of gaining protection from outside threats, such as raiders from other regions. The Varangians, with their seafaring skills and military prowess, were well suited to defending the Slavs against these threats. It is also possible that the Slavs saw the Varangians as a means of gaining access to new trade routes and markets. The Varangians had extensive trading networks throughout Europe and the Middle East and may have been able to help the Slavs expand their economic opportunities. Whatever the reasons, the Slavs invited Varangian leaders to rule over them, marking the beginning of the Rurik dynasty, which would go on to play a significant role in early Russian history. The first leader of Kievan Rus was Rurik, a Varangian chieftain who is believed to have been invited to rule over the Slavic tribes in the region. Rurik established his capital in the city of Novgorod, which was an important trading hub in the region. Over time, the state expanded to include other major cities such as Kiev, Chernihiv, and Smolensk. Kievan Rus was a loose confederation of tribes and principalities, and its rulers were known as princes. They were elected by a council of nobles known as the Vesh, which was responsible for making important decisions and advising the prince. The princes were responsible for maintaining law and order, collecting taxes, and protecting the state from external threats. Kievan Rus was heavily influenced by the Byzantine Empire, and its culture and religion were shaped by Orthodox Christianity. The Cyrillic alphabet, which is still used in Russia and other Slavic countries today, was introduced to Kievan Rus by the Byzantine missionaries Cyril and Methodius. The Orthodox Church played a crucial role in the formation of the Russian identity, and it remains an important cultural and religious institution in Russia today. Despite its many successes, Kievan Rus was weakened by internal divisions and invasions from neighboring tribes. In the 13th century, the Mongol Empire invaded Kievan Rus and established its control over the region. The Mongol domination lasted for over 2 centuries, and during this time, the Russian princes gradually consolidated their power, leading to the emergence of the Grand Principality of Moscow as the dominant power in Russia. Kievan Rus remains an important period in Russian history and culture, and it continues to be celebrated in literature, art, and popular culture. Many of the country's most famous landmarks, such as the Kremlin and St. Basil's Cathedral, were built during this period and reflect the cultural and architectural legacy of Kievan Rus. The Rus-Byzantine War of 860 was a conflict between the Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire. The Kievan Rus were a confederation of East Slavic tribes that had emerged in the 9th century in what is now Ukraine and Russia. The Byzantine Empire was a powerful state that controlled much of the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions. The war began when the Rus launched a raid on Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. The Rus fleet, led by a chieftain named Askold, sailed down the Dnieper River and into the Black Sea, where they attacked several Byzantine cities and plundered their riches. They eventually reached Constantinople and demanded tribute from the Byzantine Emperor, Michael III. The Byzantine Emperor, fearing the Rus' military prowess, agreed to pay the tribute. However, the Rus continued to raid Byzantine territory, causing widespread panic and fear. The war ended when the Rus agreed to withdraw their forces from Byzantine territory in exchange for a large payment of gold and other valuable goods. The Byzantine Empire was relieved to have avoided a protracted conflict with the Rus, who were seen as a dangerous and unpredictable force. The Rus-Byzantine War of 860 was a significant event in the history of the Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire. It demonstrated the military power and ambitions of the Rus, who would go on to establish a powerful state in the region. It also highlighted the vulnerability of the Byzantine Empire, which would continue to face threats from the Rus and other barbarian tribes for centuries to come. Overall, the Rus-Byzantine War of 860 was a precursor to the larger conflicts that would shape the history of Eastern Europe and the Byzantine Empire for centuries to come. It also demonstrated the importance of diplomacy and negotiation in resolving conflicts between powerful states, as the Byzantine Empire was able to avoid a prolonged conflict with the Rus through skillful diplomacy and the promise of tribute. In 862, the Varangian prince Rurik arrived in Novgorod and established the Rurikid dynasty, which would rule over Kievan Rus and later Russia for over 700 years. Rurik was invited by the local Slavic tribes to rule over them and provide protection against external threats. The exact origins of Rurik are not clear, but according to the Primary Chronicle, a medieval text that recorded the early history of the Kievan Rus, he was a prince from Scandinavia. Some scholars believe that Rurik may have been a member of the legendary Viking elite known as the Varangian Guard, who served as the personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors. Upon his arrival in Novgorod, Rurik established a princely court and began to consolidate his power over the surrounding territories. He also formed alliances with other local tribes, such as the Slavs and Finno-Ugric peoples, and established trade relations with neighboring states, such as the Khazars and the Byzantine Empire. Rurik's reign was marked by stability and peace, and his descendants continued to expand the territory of Kievan Rus through conquest and diplomacy. The Rurikid dynasty would eventually establish a powerful centralized state centered in Kiev, which would become the cultural and political center of the East Slavic world. The legacy of Rurik and the Rurikid dynasty in Russian history is significant. They laid the foundations for the development of the Russian state and culture, and their legacy would be felt for centuries to come. The Rurikids established a tradition of centralized power, territorial expansion, and cultural development that would shape the course of Russian history for many years to come. In 882, Oleg of Novgorod, a descendant of Rurik and a member of the Rurikid dynasty, conquered Kiev and moved the capital of Kievan Rus from Novgorod to Kiev. Oleg was a successful military commander and a skilled diplomat, and he played a significant role in the expansion of the Kievan Rus. According to the primary chronicle, Oleg was initially sent to collect tribute from the tribes of the Drevlians, who had refused to pay their dues to the Kievan Rus. However, Oleg saw an opportunity to expand his territory and launched a successful military campaign against the Drevlians. He eventually captured their capital city of Iskorosin and established Kiev as his new base of operations. Under Oleg's rule, Kiev became the cultural and political center of the Kievan Rus. He established a strong centralized government and expanded the territory of the Rus through a series of successful military campaigns. He also established trade relations with neighboring states, such as the Byzantine Empire, and promoted the growth of Christianity in the region. Oleg's conquest of Kiev and his establishment of a strong centralized state laid the foundations for the Golden Age of Kievan Rus, which would last from the late 10th century to the early 13th century. During this time, the Kievan Rus became a major regional power, and Kiev became one of the largest and wealthiest cities in Europe. Overall, Oleg's conquest of Kiev was a significant event in the history of Kievan Rus. It established Kiev as the political and cultural center of the region and laid the foundations for the growth and expansion of the Kievan Rus in the centuries to come. In 907, Oleg of Kiev launched an attack on the Byzantine Empire, known as the Rus-Byzantine War of 907. Oleg's army sailed down the Dnieper River and besieged the city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. This was the second major military campaign launched by the Kievan Rus against the Byzantine Empire, the first being the Rus-Byzantine War of 860. According to the primary chronicle, Oleg's campaign was motivated by a desire to expand the territory of the Kievan Rus and to establish trade relations with the Byzantine Empire. The Rus had long been interested in the wealth and culture of the Byzantine Empire, and they saw an opportunity to establish themselves as a major player in the Mediterranean trade networks. The siege of Constantinople was unsuccessful, but it demonstrated the military prowess of the Kievan Rus and their ability to project power beyond their borders. The campaign also resulted in the establishment of favorable trade relations between the Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire, which would continue to grow in the centuries to come. The Rus-Byzantine Wars marked a period of intense political and cultural exchange between the Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire. The Rus were exposed to Byzantine culture and technology, which had a significant impact on their own cultural and artistic development. The Byzantines, in turn, were introduced to the rich resources and markets of the northern lands, which furthered their own economic interests. Overall, the Rus-Byzantine War of 907 was a significant event in the history of the Kievan Rus. It demonstrated their military power and desire for expansion, as well as their interest in establishing trade relations with neighboring states. The campaign also marked the beginning of a period of cultural and political exchange between the Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire, which would shape the course of their histories for centuries to come. In 912, Oleg of Kiev died, and he was succeeded by his protege and relative, Igor, who was Rurik's son. Igor was a member of the Rurikid dynasty and the second ruler of the Kievan Rus to rule from Kiev. According to the primary chronicle, Igor was a capable ruler, but he faced a number of challenges during his reign. One of his first tasks was to consolidate his power and establish his legitimacy as the new ruler of the Kievan Rus. He faced resistance from some of the tribal leaders and had to suppress several rebellions to maintain his authority. During his reign, Igor continued Oleg's policy of expansion and launched several military campaigns to conquer neighboring territories. He also established trade relations with the Byzantine Empire and traveled to Constantinople to negotiate favorable trade deals. However, Igor's rule was also marked by conflict with the Drevlians, a neighboring tribe who had previously rebelled against Oleg. In 945, the Drevlians revolted again and killed Igor in an ambush while he was collecting tribute from their capital city of Iskorosin. Despite his tragic end, Igor's reign had a significant impact on the history of the Kievan Rus. He continued the policy of expansion and trade that had been established by Oleg, and his reign marked a period of stability and consolidation for the Kievan Rus. His death, however, set the stage for a period of instability and conflict, as his widow, Olga, would seek revenge against the Drevlians and establish herself as one of the most powerful rulers in the history of the Kievan Rus. In 941, the Rus-Byzantine War took place, marking one of the several conflicts between the Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire. The Rus army, led by the Varangian prince Igor of Kiev, launched an attack on the Byzantine Empire and landed at Bithynia, a region in northern west of Asia Minor. The Rus army initially achieved some success, raiding several Byzantine cities and plundering their wealth. However, the Byzantines soon gathered their forces and launched a counterattack, led by the Byzantine general John Korkwa. Korkwa was known for his military prowess and had previously defeated Arab and Bulgarian armies. In September 941, the Byzantine fleet engaged the Rus fleet in the waters of the Bosphorus Strait, near Constantinople. The Byzantine fleet was able to destroy the Rus ships, and many of the Rus soldiers were killed or captured. The defeat of the Rus army was a significant blow to their prestige and power, and it marked the end of Igor's military campaign against the Byzantines. However, the conflict did not result in any territorial gains or losses for either side. The Rus-Byzantine War of 941 is one of the several conflicts between the Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire, which were fought over trade routes, territories, and political influence. The Varangians, or Norsemen, who made up a significant portion of the Rus army, were known for their raiding and trading activities, and they established several trade connections with the Byzantine Empire. However, the conflicts between the two powers also reflected wider tensions between the Eastern and Western worlds, and they had a significant impact on the political and cultural development of both societies. In 945, following the Rus-Byzantine War of 941, a new treaty was signed between the Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire. The treaty, known as the Rus-Byzantine Treaty of 945, was negotiated by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII and the Kievan Rus Prince Igor of Kiev. Under the terms of the treaty, the Kievan Rus agreed to renounce their claims to certain Byzantine territories that they had previously contested, including the cities of Cherson and Kerch on the Crimean Peninsula. In exchange, the Byzantine Empire recognized the Kievan Rus as a legitimate political entity and agreed to provide them with trade privileges and access to Byzantine markets. The treaty was significant because it marked the first time that the Kievan Rus had gained formal recognition from a major European power. It also helped to establish the Kievan Rus as a major player in the regional power struggles of Eastern Europe and laid the foundation for their eventual expansion into the territories of modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The Rus-Byzantine Treaty of 945 also had important implications for the cultural and religious development of the Kievan Rus. As part of the treaty, the Byzantine Empire agreed to provide religious assistance to the Kievan Rus in the form of priests and missionaries, and to help establish the Eastern Orthodox Church in the region. This led to the adoption of Eastern Orthodoxy as the dominant religion of the Kievan Rus and helped to establish a cultural and religious connection between the Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire that would endure for centuries. Overall, the Rus-Byzantine Treaty of 945 was an important moment in the early history of the Kievan Rus, marking their recognition as a legitimate political entity and establishing their cultural and religious ties to the Byzantine Empire. In 945, Igor, the Prince of Kiev, died while still relatively young. He was succeeded by his young son, Sviatoslav I, who was only 3 years old at the time. With Sviatoslav being too young to rule, his mother, Olga, assumed the role of regent and began to rule on behalf of her son. Olga, who was also of noble birth, was known for her intelligence, wit, and strategic thinking. As regent, she took over the responsibility of governing the Kievan Rus and began to assert her authority over the boyars, or nobles, who held significant power in the region. She also worked to strengthen the economy, increase trade, and improve the infrastructure of the Kievan Rus. Olga's most significant achievement as regent, however, was her conversion to Christianity. In 957, she traveled to Constantinople, where she was baptized and officially converted to the Eastern Orthodox faith. Olga's conversion to Christianity was a significant moment in the history of the Kievan Rus, as it helped to establish the Eastern Orthodox Church as the dominant religion of the region and laid the foundation for the Christianization of the Kievan Rus under her grandson, Vladimir I. Overall, Olga's regency was a period of relative stability and prosperity for the Kievan Rus. Her intelligence and leadership skills helped to establish a strong foundation for her son's reign and set the stage for the expansion of the Kievan Rus under her grandson, Vladimir I. In 963, Olga's regency over the Kievan Rus came to an end. Her son, Sviatoslav I, had come of age and assumed full control of the principality. Although Olga's regency was relatively short-lived, it had a significant impact on the early history of the Kievan Rus. During her time as regent, Olga had worked tirelessly to establish stability and prosperity in the Kievan Rus. She had strengthened the economy, improved the infrastructure, and asserted her authority over the boyars. Her conversion to Christianity was also a significant moment in the history of the Kievan Rus, as it helped to establish the Eastern Orthodox Church as the dominant religion of the region and laid the foundation for the Christianization of the Kievan Rus under her grandson, Vladimir I. Despite the end of her regency, Olga remained a significant figure in the history of the Kievan Rus. Her legacy as a strong and intelligent leader continued to inspire future generations of rulers, and her contributions to the development of the Kievan Rus helped to shape the course of Eastern European history. In 965, Sviatoslav I, the Prince of Kiev, launched a successful campaign against Khazaria, a powerful Turkic state that had dominated the region for centuries. The Khazars had long been a thorn in the side of the Kievan Rus, and Sviatoslav saw their defeat as a way to consolidate his power and expand his territory. Sviatoslav's campaign against the Khazars was a brutal and bloody affair. His army swept through the region, sacking cities and slaughtering thousands of Khazar warriors. Despite fierce resistance, the Khazars were unable to withstand the might of the Kievan Rus, and by the end of the year, they had been defeated and their state was effectively destroyed. The conquest of Khazaria was a significant moment in the history of the Kievan Rus. It marked a turning point in the balance of power in Eastern Europe and helped to establish the Kievan Rus as a dominant force in the region. It also gave Sviatoslav a significant boost in power and prestige, and he went on to establish himself as one of the most powerful and successful rulers in the early history of the Kievan Rus. However, Sviatoslav's conquest of Khazaria was not without its consequences. The destruction of the Khazar state left a power vacuum in the region, which was quickly filled by other groups, including the Pechenegs, who would go on to be a major rival to the Kievan Rus in the years to come. Additionally, the brutal nature of Sviatoslav's campaign earned him many enemies, both within the Kievan Rus and beyond, and his reign would ultimately end in tragedy. In 968, the Pechenegs, a powerful nomadic tribe from the east, launched a siege of Kiev, the capital of the Kievan Rus. The Pechenegs had long been a thorn in the side of the Kievan Rus, and their attack on Kiev was part of a larger campaign to extend their control over the region. The siege of Kiev was a significant threat to the Kievan Rus, as it was the heart of their territory and the center of their power. The Pechenegs outnumbered the defenders of Kiev by a significant margin, and it seemed as though the city was doomed to fall. However, a Rus warrior named Svenold came up with a daring plan to save the city. He and a small group of men donned the armor and weapons of fallen comrades and marched around the city walls, creating the illusion of a much larger army. The Pechenegs, frightened by the supposed size of the Rus force, quickly retreated, lifting the siege and sparing Kiev from destruction. The siege of Kiev and the successful defense of the city by Svenold and his men was a significant moment in the history of the Kievan Rus. It demonstrated the strategic thinking and bravery of the Rus warriors, and it helped to establish the Kievan Rus as a dominant force in the region. The Pechenegs remained a threat to the Kievan Rus for many years to come, but their defeat at Kiev was a significant setback and helped to establish the city as one of the most important centers of power in Eastern Europe. In 969, Sviatoslav I, the ruler of Kievan Rus, moved the capital from Kiev to Pereyaslavic in Bulgaria. This move was significant for several reasons. Firstly, it demonstrated Sviatoslav's military power and expansionist ambitions. By moving the capital to Bulgaria, he was asserting his control over a region that had previously been outside of Kievan Rus influence. This move also allowed him to expand his control over the Danube River, which was an important trade route connecting the Black Sea to the rest of Europe. Secondly, the move to Pereyaslavic was part of a broader effort by Sviatoslav to distance himself from the cultural and political influence of Byzantium. The Byzantine Empire had long been a major power in the region, and its influence had shaped the culture and politics of Kievan Rus. By moving the capital to Bulgaria, Sviatoslav was signaling his independence from Byzantine influence and asserting his own authority. Finally, the move to Pereyaslavic had significant consequences for the future of Kievan Rus. By moving the capital away from Kiev, Sviatoslav disrupted the traditional power structure of the region and opened the door for other cities to rise in importance. This would ultimately lead to a period of decentralization and fragmentation within Kievan Rus, as various cities and regions vied for power and influence. In summary, Sviatoslav's decision to move the capital from Kiev to Pereyaslavic was a bold move that demonstrated his military power, his desire for independence from Byzantine influence, and his willingness to disrupt the traditional power structure of Kievan Rus. The move would have significant consequences for the future of the region, setting the stage for a period of decentralization and fragmentation. In 971, the Byzantine Empire captured Pereyaslavic, which had served as the capital of Kievan Rus since 969. The capture of Pereyaslavic was a significant blow to the power and prestige of Sviatoslav I, the ruler of Kievan Rus, who had moved the capital there in an effort to assert his independence from Byzantine influence. With the loss of Pereyaslavic, Sviatoslav was forced to move the capital back to Kiev. This was a significant setback for his military and political ambitions, as Kiev had been the traditional center of power in Kievan Rus and was already a well-established city with its own power structures and elites. Sviatoslav's decision to move the capital away from Kiev in the first place had already disrupted these power structures and opened the door for other cities to rise in importance, but the loss of Pereyaslavets further undermined his efforts to centralize power in his own hands. The loss of Pereyaslavets also had broader implications for the relationship between Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire. The capture of the Rus capital was a clear demonstration of Byzantine military power and political influence in the region, and it forced Sviatoslav to acknowledge the superiority of the Byzantines in the ongoing struggle for control over the region. In the years following the loss of Pereyaslavets, Sviatoslav continued to expand his military and political power in the region, but his efforts were hampered by internal divisions and external pressures from neighboring states. Ultimately, his reign would be cut short by his defeat at the hands of the Khazars in 972, and the fragmentation and decentralization of Kievan Rus would continue for several centuries to come. In 972, Sviatoslav I, the ruler of Kievan Rus, was killed by the Pechenegs during an expedition into their territory. His death was a significant blow to the power and prestige of Kievan Rus, as Sviatoslav had been a powerful military leader and an ambitious political figure who had sought to expand his control over the region. Following Sviatoslav's death, his son Yaropolk I succeeded him as ruler of Kievan Rus. Yaropolk faced significant challenges in maintaining his father's legacy and asserting his own authority over the diverse and fragmented territories of Kievan Rus. He was forced to contend with rebellious nobles, ambitious rival princes, and external threats from neighboring states, including the Byzantine Empire and the Khazar Khaganate. Despite these challenges, Yaropolk was able to maintain a degree of stability and control over Kievan Rus for several years. He consolidated his power through strategic alliances with neighboring princes and through military campaigns to assert his authority over rebellious territories. He also continued his father's policy of expansion, launching campaigns against the Volga Bulgars and other neighboring states. However, Yaropolk's reign was ultimately cut short by his own brothers, who conspired against him and ultimately had him assassinated in 980. This event marked the beginning of a period of turmoil and fragmentation in Kievan Rus, as competing princes vied for power and control over the region. The decentralization and fragmentation of Kievan Rus would continue for several centuries to come, ultimately leading to the rise of the independent principalities that would later form the basis of the modern nation-states of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. In 980, Yaropolk I, the ruler of Kievan Rus, was assassinated by his own brother, Vladimir I, also known as Vladimir the Great. This act of fratricide was a common practice among the ruling dynasties of Kievan Rus, as it was seen as a way to eliminate potential rivals for the throne and consolidate power within a single family. Following Yaropolk's death, Vladimir I became the ruler of Kievan Rus. He faced significant challenges in consolidating his power and asserting his authority over the diverse and fragmented territories of Kievan Rus. He was forced to contend with rebellious nobles, ambitious rival princes, and external threats from neighboring states, including the Byzantine Empire and the Khazar Khaganate. Despite these challenges, Vladimir I was able to establish himself as a powerful and effective ruler. He consolidated his power through strategic alliances with neighboring princes and through military campaigns to assert his authority over rebellious territories. He also continued his father's policy of expansion, launching campaigns against the Volga Bulgars and other neighboring states. One of Vladimir's most significant achievements was his conversion to Christianity in 988. This event marked a major turning point in the history of Kievan Rus, as it brought the region into closer contact with the Byzantine Empire and opened up new opportunities for trade, cultural exchange, and diplomatic relations. Vladimir's conversion also paved the way for the spread of Christianity throughout Kievan Rus, which would have a lasting impact on the region's cultural, social, and political development. Overall, Vladimir the Great's reign was a pivotal period in the history of Kievan Rus, marking the beginning of a new era of consolidation, expansion, and cultural exchange. His legacy would continue to shape the region's development for centuries to come, laying the foundation for the emergence of the independent principalities that would later form the basis of the modern nation-states of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. In 981, Vladimir the Great, the ruler of Kievan Rus, launched a military campaign to conquer Red Ruthenia, a region located in present-day western Ukraine and southeastern Poland. The area was at the time under the control of the Piast dynasty, a powerful ruling family in Poland. Vladimir's campaign was part of his broader strategy of consolidating his power and expanding the territory of Kievan Rus. The conquest of Red Ruthenia was particularly significant because it brought the region under the control of Kievan Rus, giving Vladimir greater access to valuable resources and strategic trade routes. The campaign was successful, and Vladimir was able to establish Kievan Rus' control over Red Ruthenia. He installed a local prince as a vassal ruler, ensuring that the region remained loyal to Kievan Rus and strengthening Vladimir's hold over the territory. The conquest of Red Ruthenia was just one of many military campaigns launched by Vladimir during his reign. His aggressive expansionism helped to establish Kievan Rus as a dominant regional power, and paved the way for the emergence of a powerful centralized state that would shape the history of the region for centuries to come. In 988, Vladimir the Great, the ruler of Kievan Rus, oversaw the Christianization of his kingdom. Prior to this event, the people of Kievan Rus followed a variety of pagan religions, including those centered around the gods Perun, Velez, and Svarog. Vladimir was motivated to embrace Christianity for a number of reasons. One of the primary reasons was political. He recognized that Christianity was the dominant religion of the Byzantine Empire, with which Kievan Rus had close cultural and economic ties. By adopting Christianity, Vladimir hoped to strengthen Kievan Rus' ties with Byzantium and gain greater legitimacy as a ruler. To facilitate the Christianization process, Vladimir destroyed the pagan idols that had been worshipped in Kiev and other cities throughout Kievan Rus. He then invited Byzantine missionaries to come to his kingdom to spread the Christian faith. The missionaries baptized Vladimir and his top advisors, and a grand baptismal ceremony was held in Kiev, during which thousands of people were baptized in the Dnieper River. The Christianization of Kievan Rus was a significant event in the history of Eastern Europe. It helped to cement the cultural and political ties between Kievan Rus and Byzantium, and paved the way for the emergence of a distinct East Slavic Christian culture. It also established the Orthodox Church as the dominant religion of the region, a legacy that would endure for centuries to come. Thank you for watching. The history will be continued in Part 2. Please like, share, subscribe and press the bell button for latest video update.